What is up, guys? We are here to talk about introverted intuition, or NI, years after I promised I would give you this video. I released a video talking about extraverted sensing because it is my dominant function. It is the function that I am probably the most am the most comfortable talking about because it's something that I just spend most of my time in. So I released that video a few years ago and I said that I would release one about introverted intuition, and it has taken me years. But it is something that I've been thinking quite a lot about these days because of pregnancy and being in this new life stage and kind of catastrophizing a whole bunch of stuff, which we'll get into in the video. So it's basically been a whole period of new introspection, new interest in self-development, which I've always had an interest in, but to a new extent over the last few months. So I've just been thinking about it a lot, and I figured now is a good time to do this video on introverted intuition, the cognitive function that is my fourth or inferior function, and how I guess it presents and presented in my life as my inferior function, how I've developed it, how I've improved it, what that even means, and I'll be citing examples for you in all those different categories. So I'm going to start with a few disclaimers, classic. Then I will go into a little bit of a description, which I won't linger on too much because this video will be far too long. Then I'm going to talk about how baby NI or inferior NI has presented in my life, going through different stages of my life. Then I'm going to go a bit into what it means to improve your inferior function, and for me specifically NI. Then I'll talk about how I feel my NI has improved, and at the end I'll just give a bit of advice for ESFPs wishing to develop their NI. So obviously, if you're an ESFP, I encourage you to watch this because you'll probably relate to a lot of what I say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But even if you're not an ESFP, I'm going to be talking quite a bit about dominant and inferior functions in general and how you can improve them and what that means in the Myers-Briggs system. So I like to think this would be an interesting video for you in general if you're interested in Myers-Briggs. As always, I'm very interested in your comments, so please feel free to comment down below with your experiences with NI or your dominant inferior functions, etc., etc. So I just want to start off with the classic MBTI disclaimer, which is that MBTI is a tool. It is one possible way of giving language to human phenomena in personality and behavior, how we perceive and judge the world. But the language of the functions in MBTI are not the only way of explaining that phenomena. That said, this MBTI tool has been hugely helpful for me in understanding myself and others. And I think that diving into the cognitive functions and that language can really help you in eliminating the false dichotomies that are tempted to appear when you just sort of stop your understanding of MBTI at the 8 letters. I think at the 8 letters, it can present these false dichotomies, meaning that you are either an intuitor or a sensor, or a thinker or a feeler, and the implication is that you can kind of only do one, not the other. At least the Myers-Briggs tool, if you're approaching it on surface level, doesn't actually explain the nuance of how they are not dichotomies. You use both of those tools just at different preferences, etc., etc. So I think diving into the cognitive functions actually helps you to understand what Myers-Briggs is about and what it can actually be good for, and then you can actually use it for good in your life, as opposed to using it to limit you and just understanding MBTI through those false dichotomies. I have a few videos where I talk about healthy use of MBTI, so I will put those in the description if you're interested. I'm going to assume that most of you, if you've clicked on this video, understand the 8 cognitive functions, at least at a preliminary level, and understand introverted intuition. So I'm not going to go into a definition of any of those things to a deep extent, but again, lots of videos in the description below if you're interested in a better explanation of those things. That said, I'll just provide a quick little description of introverted intuition. Will it be quick? Your guess is as good as mine. And if your guess is no, then you're probably right, because it is not my particular gift to describe things in a succinct and accurate way. I tend to need to overqualify what I'm saying. I'm also going to remind you that NI, introverted intuition, is not my strongest function. It is my inferior function. So I am not able to, I guess, wrap my head around it in such a nuanced way as I am with SE or FI, but I'm going to do my best to explain it. After all, SE and NI always work together. They are linked in essence. So even if NI isn't my dominant or auxiliary function, I still use it every day, and therefore I am at least some kind of authority to talk about it. And final disclaimer is that this video is going to be mostly my opinion and speculation based on my experience of NI. I'm just going to be presenting what I've learned and how I feel it's presented in my life. So kind of just telling you stories about that. It's going to be mostly subjective what I talk about today, basically. So just quickly, introverted intuition is an abstract function that is not centered on sensory details as the sensing functions are. It's abstract and it focuses on creating and refining patterns. So of a bunch of different data points, NI will be able to grab together the central essence, idea, vision of those data points and sort of distill it to the most golden nugget. So it's a pattern recognition function, and naturally if you are good at recognizing patterns, you are going to project those patterns into the future possibilities, future visions, which is why there's the joke of NI DOMs being fortune tellers or people who can see into the future. NI can behold something and recognize the pattern and the implications of said patterns naturally and immediately. This function does not have to be based on sensory datas, as opposed to SE, which is very much based on sensory data. In fact, it strips away a lot of the sensory details in order to, again, distill what it's been given to the central essence or idea. And this key idea is the one that can be relied on in a variety of contexts to the NI user. This is why there's also the joke that NI DOMs read into things or find things that aren't there in sensory data, where a lot of us, especially us sensors, would see things as they are for what they are in the sensory world, and NI DOM would see what's behind the sense data, the implication of the sense data. They're always looking deeper and they're doing it naturally, and it's a gift and it's wonderful. So if you're talking to an NI dominant or auxiliary user, you'll probably find that the conversation will be quite abstract. They won't be able to help themselves in talking about the central idea behind what's been raised. They will naturally bring conversations into the abstract, is what I found. So the difference between an NI DOM SE inferior versus an SE DOM NI inferior is that NI DOMs will see the idea or the pattern or the vision first, and then everything that they behold in the sensory world will just be an example of that idea that they've seen immediately in the abstract. Whereas SE DOMs will see the tangible data first and then use that data as a means of formulating an idea or pattern or vision, which is why SE DOMs have that meme of just existing in the moment and not being able to foresee circumstances in the future. Can relate. Because they've got to gather the tangible data first before they can create the pattern. Oh, this is cool. I've just discovered that my light can make different colors. Should I change the color? I probably shouldn't do that though. It'll distract a lot. Oh, this one flashes. All right, now we're in a clinical white, which we love. So how has my inferior or baby NI presented in my life? If I was to sum up the main way in which my baby NI has showed up in my life, it would be in my inability to see potential outcomes of decisions that I make in the present, as well as my inability to formulate long-term visions or patterns, to plan long-term, and my just general lack of interest in discussing the long term. So obviously with dominant SE, extroverted sensing, inferior NI, introverted intuition, NI doesn't present as obviously as SE and hasn't in my life, but they are always working together. Remember, they are linked in essence, SE and NI. They work on the same axis. So I am always using NI, but I prefer SE and skew heavily towards SE. So most of my life has been 90% use of SE, 10% of use of NI, and in the past it was probably even 100-0. And you can say that about all the cognitive functions, the inferior and dom functions. The inferior function is suppressed because of a hyper preference of use of the dominant function. So when I was young, pretty much for my entire life until I was 25, SE was my comfort, it was my addiction. I'm not even kidding when I say until I was 25, I did not have interest in having deep conversations, because why would I want to spend time doing something that I'm not naturally good at? I wasn't good at finding patterns, and I didn't have anything to say or any insight to give in deep conversations because I, yes, had all this SE data that I'd built up in my life, but I hadn't formed patterns with the data yet, so I didn't have a lot of wisdom to contribute in those areas. I wasn't doing a lot of introspection whatsoever, and so I was basically just doing, but not really making sense of a lot of the stuff that I was doing. So how that presented in my life was that I had to make a lot of mistakes, specifically mistakes in my actions that didn't even represent who I was or any values that I held, but I just had to do them. I just was existing in a perpetual state of just doing. If something was in front of me, I would do it. And there wasn't even necessarily a reason. It was just, oh, new shiny thing to do or experience in the moment. And in fact, I had to repeat some of the same mistakes many, many times before I even realized, formed that consistent pattern that told me that they were mistakes or things that weren't good for me or didn't resonate with that sense of who I was or my values. It took me repeating multiple of the same mistakes because the first time I did those mistakes, I didn't even know they were mistakes because I hadn't seen the effect of how they negatively affected me yet. An example of this was that I spent my entire early 20s pretty much drinking like 3 nights a week, like even more sometimes. And that would make me, have really bad sleep. And I had a body of a young 20-something-year-old, so it wasn't really having effects on my energy levels. I was still able to show up for work on time and do my job, even though I was living this lifestyle. And I lived that way for many years, just consistently drinking multiple nights a week, sleeping the day away and, drinking and partying throughout the night. And nothing in my life told me that this was a mistake or something that wasn't good for me. I'd heard that it wasn't good for you, theoretically, but I wasn't experiencing the actual effects of that in my tangible body or existence. Like, I was still fine. So I still did those things. There wasn't even some intuition that was telling me, you're making a mistake here. I basically was just ignoring that, which I know is true on some level, even though at the time it felt like I wasn't ignoring anything. So because I'm not naturally good at pattern recognition or formation, and I could say this about all the dom inferior functions, it's exhausting for you to spend too much time in your inferior function, especially at a young age. So why would you spend a lot of time in it? It was exhausting for me to have to create new patterns or patterns in general, or even introspect and think about things unless I had seriously enough SE data to tell me so overtly that is wrong or bad for you that my body and my mind couldn't deny it anymore. It got to the point where I had to make the mistake multiple times or have the behavior multiple times that it would scream so loudly at me, hey, this is not good for you, that I just couldn't ignore it anymore. Then that was the point when I was like, okay, I will stop that, or I will change my behavior. Case in point, I had a few different friendships that I took for granted, and I hurt a few of my friends, and it took multiple times of me hurting those friends to realize that I needed to change my behavior. It took multiple times of me making mistakes in my life in my early 20s to realize, hey, this is actually affecting me in a negative way, because it happened enough times that I realized I was the common denominator, and therefore something had to change if I wanted a better quality of life, or if I wanted to love others better, because I didn't even know that this wasn't the way to love people. It's very complicated. And of course, it's not just my personality that we could cite as reasons for my behavior being like this. There were a whole bunch of things going on. I had moved to Korea, which was a way of escapism, I actually think, in a lot of ways. And some of my behavior was escapism as well, from other things, just deep-seated things that I was not addressing. So that's a whole other thing. I don't think ESFPs necessarily all go as crazy as I did. They don't all need to go as crazy as I did to realize these lessons and turn around. But for me, that was my journey. Another really obvious way that my dominant SE inferior NI presented was that because SE is such a present action-based function, I was basically living a life where I still do this in some ways, I naturally have the tendency to give 100% of my energy into the present moment, and therefore 0% of my energy to a long-term moment or vision. So, and this is a good lesson to be aware of if you're an SE Dom, we have a tendency to put 100% of us into the present moment. So it's almost like our energy is wasted on the present moment. It's not, obviously it's a gift and it's wonderful to be able to be present in the present moment. But I think The art of knowing you're an SE Dom and refining that and like working with that is knowing that that's a tendency of yours, and perhaps maybe changing it to 80% into the present moment and 20% to long-term visions. We should direct some of our energy into long-term plans and visions, and then I think we would be unstoppable. I've learned that recently since being forced to backlog my content for maternity leave, and I've been like, wow, I did not know I was capable of doing this, but it took something so dire as me wanting a 3-month break for maternity leave for me to actually make that plan happen and backlog my content, which is something I've literally never been able to do in my entire 3-year career as a YouTuber. And I mean, that's been present in my YouTube channel forever. I've always thought that my YouTube channel could be bigger or more successful if I had the natural ability to direct my energy into long-term planning or a vision. My enthusiasm and ability to do YouTube has largely come from me knowing I have the freedom to theoretically quit at any moment. So I have resisted having long-term relationships or partnerships with people who want to like bet on me, because I'm like, I can't guarantee that this is even going to go past next month. Like, it's very hard for me to see past next month. And you know, week by week is how I usually do my content. Like, I will write, film and edit the video that I will post on Thursday in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I'll use those 3 days to create the video that is coming out that week. And the approach of the deadline is what stimulates me. It's impossible. It has felt, I've tried many times, it has felt impossible to even make a video a week in advance. So I've often felt that if I just took some of that energy that I'm putting 100% into the present moment and directed it into a long-term vision, my channel could do much better. But this is my personality type. This is how it's worked. And I'm proving and backlogging the content currently that I don't have to be limited by this tendency in my type. It's just good to be aware of. So another really obvious way that my baby NI presents is that projecting circumstances and visions into the future is really hard for me if I have no SE data to back that up. So I feel super, super, super confident about the things that I have a lot of SE data points for, but if I have nothing, I tend to really catastrophize, or really it just feels like absolute gray unknown to me, and that can get really overwhelming or scary for me. So for instance, I have no data for being a wife and mother. Well, I do now. I've been married 6 months, almost 6 months, but at the beginning I had no data for being a wife or mother, and I had to go through basically a few months of having one giant existential crisis because I wanted to be prepared in so many ways and wanted to do a good job, but I had no idea what that entailed. How to prepare, and I just kept projecting these really catastrophic visions onto the future, and my husband, who is an ENTJ, so he used an NI as the second function, was like, where are these conclusions coming from? And that's another thing, the inferior function can present in quite an archetypal sort of way. So for me, what that looks like with introverted intuition is that the visions that I project into the future, especially with limited SE data, are very archetypal. It's like I have 3 options. Either it's the worst case scenario that's definitely going to happen, the best case scenario that's definitely going to happen, or some other third one that I know is possible but I can't put my finger on it. But the journey of knowing your type is that you know that this is a tendency that you have, and you allow others to help you through it. So my husband is an ENTJ, one of my best friends is an ENTJ, and I have sat with her multiple times and said, okay, look, I have no data points for this. Can you help me project something more positive into the future so that I don't catastrophize and lose my mind over what could possibly happen? And she helps me with that. And in many ways, I help her with the gift of SE to bring her into the present moment, or put more emphasis on sensory pieces of data that she's for some reason ignored. So what does it mean to improve my NI? And let's see if we can change the color again. Ooh, this is even more clinical. All right, we're going to use this now. So improving your inferior function. It is my belief that you cannot improve your inferior function to the point where you are using it with such competence as your natural superior function. So I will never be as good at NI as I am at SE. It'll never be as natural for me. Rather, how I see developing or improving your inferior function is you just learn to trust it a bit more. And you learn to lean into the foundation that it is giving you. And in that, the foundation gets stronger. So for example, there are many different things that I have solid NI patterns for because of all the data I've built up with those SE points. Like MBTI, for instance, that is a topic that I really do trust the NI patterns that I've built. And I think that's aided my channel a lot. And you can see it in the comedy sketches that I do. What I do is mostly based on patterns that I've noticed based on human behavior that presents in external body language and facial expressions of people of certain types, and I use that on my channel. And I know that those patterns are largely reliable. And because I've built those up naturally, they do not take a lot of energy for me to exist in those patterns. Another way that I have improved my NI is, although I know there are certain things that are going to stump me and make me catastrophize when I don't have SE data points for them, for example, being a wife and mother, there are certain NI patterns I've built over my life, being a 30-year-old woman, that I know I can trust. For example, I have formed the pattern and I have proven that I have got through 100% of the bad things that have happened to me. And I've emerged resilient, which must mean that I'm strong. I can trust myself. I have a husband who I can trust very much. I'm self-aware enough that even when I'm faced with hardship, I know that I can face it head on and emerge resilient and not bitter or jaded. I know that I have the tools for that. So these are patterns that, even though I don't have data for being a wife and mother per se, I do have data for those. And those are the things that I choose to trust on the days when my NI is catastrophizing potential bad things that could happen, like in terms of me being a bad mother or wife. And you could say the same thing for all of the dominant and inferior functions. I think it's good to think of it as a way of not, you don't expect that you're going to be as competent in your inferior function as you are in your dom function. It's not about switching off that dom function either and just existing in that inferior function, because you're never going to get the same energy that you do from your inferior function as your dominant function. And as an SE dom, I know that it's not possible for me to switch off my superior function, and I know it's not for you either. You have to rather just lean into that inferior function, allow it to exist, and learn how to work together with it rather than fighting against it. And know that your personality is going to round out and be more colorful and beautiful if you allow that balance and the access to happen rather than spending 100% of your time in your Dom 2 functions. So rather than stifling one, let your inferior function complement your dominant function. So one of the ways that I've done this just naturally over time is, and I think this just comes with maturity, but I've noticed as I've got older that I have learned to ignore the urge to just SE when the urge hits, to just engage in the present moment in an activity, in a behavior. When that urge hits, I don't indulge, because I know that that is a tendency I have to not be able to see the pattern or the implications of that in the moment. And so I trust that not choosing to indulge, and as you grow older, that intuition of, hey, this might not be a really good thing for you to do, gets stronger. And that's what I mean when I say that it'll just happen naturally with age, with maturity, with time, with self-awareness. That lower function will round out. It's not something that you're going to have to take this insanely hard amount of energy to focus into. I think it really will just happen over time if you are open to learning and growing and being like, hey, yep, this is a limitation of my type. This is a tendency that I have. So let me learn from others who use my inferior function as their dominant function. And I genuinely really think you'll learn more about your inferior function that way. And you will, just learn to trust yourself more. Learn to have the humility of, hey, I'm not good at everything and I need to recognize my shortcomings, my vices, learn from others. And I think then naturally those moments when you just want to SE or you just want to dom function, you'll just naturally have the tendency to step back and let that inferior function come on through and remind you why maybe jumping on that jumping castle when you're pregnant is not a good idea. Once you have that self-respect and you want to learn and stuff, and you actually have a desire to be a person with integrity, your behaviors are going to reflect what you've learned. And so as you just learn lessons about yourself, a tried and true pattern in my case, then my behavior is going to be in accordance with that. Like, I have no desire to continue to let SE run my life. I've learned the hard way that that's not a good thing for me to do. I didn't necessarily have bad intentions when I did let that rule my life, but now I've realized, bad things happen when you let SE just take over. So let's just calm down. So to sum up how my NI has improved, and let's change the color again. Back to a warm light. Yay. First of all, I guess I've learned to have the humility to know that I do not have patterns to certain things. I'm not good at building up patterns and pattern recognition. So I've learned that relying on patterns when I don't have them, or pretending that I have patterns when I don't have them, is not good for me. And so I've learned to rely on others, such as Marie and my husband, as I mentioned earlier. Another thing is my patterns about certain topics have solidified and I can trust them a lot. I'm just generally more comfortable naturally at relying on NI, integrating it into my personality, my decisions, and not resenting it or stifling it. And I think I've generally just gotten better at recognizing central ideas, images, visions in happenings in my life, media, storytelling, movies, songs. I notice these days that when I hear something or experience something in front of me, there is some kind of abstract idea happening in my mind at the same time a lot of the time. Especially when I'm sitting down watching like a TV show, there'll be something going on in my mind. Like the vision will just be naturally forming about the central theme or the central idea or the central lesson of this show. And I really enjoy that because it allows me to engage in those deeper, more intellectual conversations, more abstract conversations in a way that, like, I just have the language now to be able to say these things that reflect my experience of something, and also in a way that is in line with the values that I've formed and the person that I am, and it's just really nice. And I think this just comes with life experience as well, and so as I've got more life experience, experienced more suffering and negative things like that, my interest in those kinds of topics have improved, and I think as patterns have built, my world has just become more colourful. It's like when I was just existing in pure SE, I was living in grayscale, but now NI has allowed me to fill out some color there. And so now I froth a good deep dive. Not all deep dives, but I love deep dives in general. And actually most of what I listen to on YouTube these days are deep dive videos. Froth a good video essay. And so the final thing that I will say in this video is, fellow ESFPs who are watching, I hope you've learned something from this. Just know that you can be a powerhouse. Learn from me backlogging my content. I've backlogged so far a month of content. Your personality does not have to limit you. Being an SE Dom does not have to limit you. Know your tendencies. Know that you don't have a natural ability to be able to forward plan, but know that you do have the power to forward plan and make that change in your life. You don't have to do it all the time, but I've been really proud of myself and I have a lot of respect for myself in me backlogging the content that I have for my maternity leave. And I just feel like I'm so not limited by my type at all. And yeah, I just have great self-respect right now because of being able to do that. Because, you know, discipline is not something I'm great at as an ESFP, but I love to prove that I can do those things that aren't natural tendencies of my personality type. So proof that Myers-Briggs does not have to put you in a box. Also, know that having a plethora of SE experience, if you are an older SE Dom, not even super old, just like having more life experience as an SE Dom, means that the NI patterns that you formed are going to be quite reliable. So yeah, we have a tendency to not trust those patterns, but just know that you can trust those patterns and your intuition will tell you when you can trust those patterns. And because you've got the data, your patterns that you formed about something that you are well versed in or have a lot of data for are going to be accurate, like more likely going to be accurate than a lot of other people's patterns because you have the data. And I think we can be unstoppable when that happens. I don't claim to be the authority on many things, but there are certain things in my life that I can really trust my patterns on. For example, MBTI or, you know, dating. I had 12 years of dating as an adult before I got married, and I dated a lot because I was out there seeing the world, meeting people. So people in relationships, whether it's dating, friendships and all that, I really trust my patterns with that. And so I trust my ability to give advice, and I find that most of the time I'm right. So trust those patterns, trust your intuition, just leave space for that to grow, but also know that you don't have to bend over backwards to improve your inferior function, that it will just happen naturally over time with your interest in self-development, interest in being a good person, interest in virtue. It's just going to happen. Your personality was designed for that to happen over time. And if you haven't reached the point where you feel your inferior function has developed, that's fine. Give it time. You're looking into this content. That's great. You know, there's so many different videos like this for the different types on YouTube, so lean into that, have a watch of those things, keep learning, keep growing, you're doing fine. So guys, I've been talking for a very long time, and I would encourage you to leave your comments about your thoughts. Are you an ESFP/SE-DOM and you have your own thoughts, you related to what I said? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Very interested to hear and read those, and just whoever you are. Doesn't even matter if you like MBTI. I mean, if you've made it this far and you don't like MBTI, great. Leave a comment anyway. What did you learn? What were your thoughts? And if you are of a different personality type, leave your thoughts as well about how your DOM and inferior functions have played off each other. Did you relate to things I said in this video? Are you an ESFP and you completely disagree with what I said? Definitely interested in hearing as well. So thank you guys for watching. You're fantastic, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.